It started subtly. A month ago, my husband, Edward, began acting strangely, though not in an overtly alarming way. At first, it seemed sweet. He'd say things like, "You should rest more, Madeline," or, "Let me take care of the washing up tonight, love." That might sound like the behavior of a caring partner, and I tried to believe that.
Truly I did.
But it wasn't like Edward. In the 10 years we'd been married, he'd never been unkind, just indifferent. Helpful only when prompted. The type who'd leave his coffee mug on the table without a second thought, expecting me to pick it up. So, when he suddenly brought me breakfast in bed one Saturday morning, I was more confused than touched. I watched him place the tray gently in my lap, a smile fixed on his face like it had been painted there. "You've been looking tired lately," he said softly. "You deserve a bit of pampering." "Thank you," I replied, cautious. "This is thoughtful." He kissed my forehead. "You just rest today. I'll take care of everything." Something in his eyes unsettled me. There was warmth, yes, but it felt deliberate.
Practiced.
That evening, he surprised me again by ordering takeaway from my favorite Thai place in town. He even remembered to ask for extra coriander, something I usually had to remind him about 3 times. It felt like being married to a stranger who had memorized a script titled Perfect Husband. Still, I told myself not to be so cynical. Maybe he was finally paying attention. Maybe he was changing. After all, people evolve, don't they? But then there were the whispers. Quiet phone calls, in the study. Text messages he'd quickly swipe off screen whenever I walked past. Once, I caught a glimpse of one. Just a name, Clara. No surname. No context. When I asked who she was, he shrugged. Just someone from work. New hire in accounts. I let it go. Silly of me, really. I didn't want to be the paranoid wife. I told myself I was overthinking things, that his sudden helpfulness was a good thing, not a red flag. But late at night, as I lay beside him, watching his back rise and fall, I felt something crack inside me. A quiet splintering. Because I could sense it now, growing like frost on a window pane. Edward was hiding something. And whatever it was, it had already begun to change everything. A week later, I found the drawer. It wasn't locked, which made it worse somehow. As if Edward didn't care whether I found it or not. It was in the spare room, what we called the study, though neither of us ever used it for anything but storing odd bits. I was tidying up the bookshelves when I noticed the drawer in the old writing desk slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me. Inside, neatly stacked, were receipts.
Dozens of them.
Hotel stays, restaurant bills, and oddly enough, spa bookings. All within the past 3 months. None of them places we had ever been to together. I picked up a receipt from a hotel in Oxford. The date was just 2 weeks ago. I remember that day clearly. He told me he was working late, that he had to attend some emergency meeting at the office. He even came home smelling of printer ink and stale coffee.
But the receipt didn't lie.
I sat down in the creaky leather chair and kept digging. One receipt in particular stopped me cold. It was for a small boutique hotel in Bath. Not expensive, but intimate. On the signature line, in the same careless script I knew too well, was Edward's name. Below that, scribbled in feminine handwriting, a note. "Thank you for the perfect weekend. See, Clara?" My stomach churned. I took the stack of receipts and stuffed them into an envelope, tucking it between the pages of an old gardening book in the living room.
I didn't know why.
Instinct, perhaps. Some small voice inside me whispering that this would matter later. That night, I watched Edward as he ate his dinner, asking me about my day as if nothing had happened. He was relaxed, almost smug. I played along, pretending to be tired, smiling faintly, answering with one-word replies. "Maybe you should get to bed early," he said gently. "You've been looking a bit pale lately." I nodded. "You're probably right." When he leaned in to kiss me goodnight, I let him. But I didn't close my eyes. I didn't return the kiss. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. But the cracks were growing wider. And I had just found the first pieces of proof. It began with the perfume. A week after I found the receipts, Edward came home late again. I had been pretending to sleep on the sofa, but as he walked past me, I caught the scent. It wasn't mine. I hadn't worn perfume in days, and certainly not something as floral and heady as what lingered on his coat. It was the kind of scent that clung. Deliberate. Feminine. I waited until he was in the shower before slipping into the hallway and lifting the coat from the peg. I brought it to my nose and inhaled. The smell was strong around the collar. Roses and jasmine. Not subtle. Not something picked up by accident. I checked pockets and found a lipstick. Pale pink. Not my shade. Not even close. The next morning, I called in sick. I needed time to think, to observe, to prepare. Edward left for work as usual, kissing my forehead and saying something about a client meeting. His lies were smooth now. Routine. But I was beginning to see the cracks. The two perfect excuses. The way his eyes never quite met mine anymore. I decided to follow him. I felt ridiculous, like a character in a cheap detective novel. But I had to know. I waited 15 minutes after he left, then took a cab. I knew the general direction his office was in, and I told the driver to keep a distance. To my surprise, Edward never went near the office. He walked 2 blocks past it and turned into a side street. I paid the driver and followed on foot, keeping my head down and my coat collar turned up. He stopped outside a small cafe, with ivy around the windows, and checked his watch. She arrived 3 minutes later. Clara. I recognized her now. She'd come to our wedding. A family friend, she'd said. I remembered her dress. Navy blue. Elegant. I remembered how she laughed too loudly at Edward's jokes. How she'd touched his arm, lingering just a second too long. She was here now, smiling at him like she had every right to. They went inside together, and I stood across the street, frozen. I didn't need to see more. Not yet. My heart pounded, and I felt a scream building in my chest. But I swallowed it down. I turned and walked away. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears came later at home, when I opened the wardrobe and saw the dress I'd worn to our anniversary dinner, still unwashed. I remembered how he told me I looked beautiful that night. How he held my hand across the table and said he was lucky to have me. And all the while he was with her. He was with Clara. The next few days passed in a haze. I moved through the house like a ghost, performing my routines with robotic precision. Edward didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps he did, and chose not to care. He was preoccupied, always distracted, his phone never far from his hand. I began watching him more closely. I noted the times he left, the way he spoke, the sudden smiles that had nothing to do with me. I became an observer in my own life, collecting pieces of a puzzle I already knew the picture of. Then one evening, while he was in the shower again, I finally gave in to temptation. I unlocked his phone. He'd grown careless. The passcode hadn't changed. My hands trembled slightly as I opened his messages. Most were routine work updates, family group chats, but then I saw her name. Clara. She didn't even bother with a fake contact. There was a thread of messages going back weeks. Compliments, plans, flirtations, and photos. One of her in a dressing gown, holding a wine glass, blowing a kiss to the camera. Another of Edward, shirtless, lying on what clearly wasn't our bed. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. 1,000 thoughts tore through my mind. Anger, humiliation, heartbreak, but above all, a rising clarity. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a choice, a betrayal lived out day after day, hidden in plain sight. And I had been looking the other way. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching Edward breathe, peacefully unaware that the walls he'd built with lies were beginning to crumble. I stared at the ceiling until the sun rose, and when he stirred beside me, I kissed his cheek and told him to have a good day. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. I needed to be sure of every detail. I needed to be prepared, strong, not broken by emotion. So I played the part. I smiled when he came home. I cooked his favorite meals. I laughed at his stories. All the while I planned. I took photos of the messages. I began writing down dates, receipts, timelines. I needed evidence. not just for the truth, but for what I would do with it when the moment came. And then something unexpected happened. Clara called the house. I answered, masking my voice with polite calm. "Hello, this is Alice. May I ask who's calling?" There was a pause. Then the line went dead. She knew, or suspected. Perhaps Edward had grown careless with her too. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was a game. One they thought I didn't know I was part of. But I was in it now, and I intended to win. After Clara's call, something in me shifted. The pain was still there, sharp and deep, but now it was wrapped in purpose. I was no longer a passive player in Edward's charade. I was preparing for the reckoning. I began to follow patterns. Edward always left the house at the same time on Tuesdays and Thursdays, claiming late meetings. He always returned home after 9, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. One Thursday, I decided not to stay behind. I followed him. I waited 10 minutes after he left, then took the car and stayed far enough behind that he wouldn't notice. My heart pounded in my chest as I trailed him through the streets of Reading, past familiar corners and into a quieter part of town. He parked outside a modest townhouse, the kind with flower pots and lace curtains. A woman opened the door before he even knocked. Clara, blonde, poised, younger than me by a few years, wearing a smile that made my skin crawl. He kissed her, right there, on the doorstep, without a care in the world. I didn't get out of the car. I simply watched. They disappeared inside together, the door closing on the life he had built in secret. It was one thing to suspect, another to see it laid bare in front of you. I drove away, pulling over 2 streets down, shaking with rage and disbelief. He was in love with her, or so he believed. And yet, he was still coming home to me, sleeping in our bed, eating food I made with hands that trembled every time he touched me. The next day, I called in sick to work and sat in our kitchen, staring at the photograph I'd taken of them together.
I didn't cry.
I didn't scream. I simply thought. Clara had become a ghost in my marriage long before I'd heard her voice on the phone. Now she was flesh and blood.
Real.
I needed to understand her. So I searched. It didn't take long. She was a solicitor at a local firm. No children. Never married. A neat, curated social media presence full of weekend brunches, yoga classes, and the occasional cryptic quote about destiny or letting go of fear. I wondered if she knew he still kissed me every morning, still told me he loved me, even if the words had become hollow. Then I saw it. A post from 2 weeks ago. A picture of a ring on her finger, delicate and gold, captioned with one word. Yes. My blood ran cold. Engaged. He had asked her to marry him, while I still wore his name, while our wedding portrait still hung on the staircase wall. That evening, Edward came home with flowers. Tulips, my favorite ones. He kissed my forehead and said, "You look beautiful today." I smiled. I took the flowers. I even arranged them in a vase. But inside me, a storm was building. I now knew the whole truth. He wasn't preparing to leave me. He was preparing to live 2 lives. But I wouldn't let him. Not anymore. Our wedding anniversary was approaching. 13 years. I wondered if Edward would remember, or if Clara had already taken over his calendar, his heart, his plans. To my surprise, he brought it up 2 days before. "Let's go out," he said casually. "Dinner at the Golden Pheasant. Just us." The Golden Pheasant was the restaurant where he'd proposed. A converted coaching inn outside the village, candlelit and romantic. It held memories etched into me like carvings in old oak. I nearly laughed at the irony, but instead I agreed. I had a plan. That night, I wore a navy dress I hadn't touched in years, the one with lace sleeves and a high collar. My hair pinned up, lips painted in soft plum. When I walked down the stairs, Edward looked up from his phone and stared a second too long. "You look stunning." "Thank you," I replied. "So do you." Dinner began with strained conversation and forced laughter. Edward seemed restless, checking his watch now and then, tapping his fingers on the stem of his wine glass. I smiled sweetly, sipping my own. Is something bothering you? I asked, feigning innocence. He shook his head. Just tired. Long week. Of course, I said. Work must be exhausting. Balancing it all. Business, meetings, Clara. The name landed between us like broken glass. His fork froze midair. His eyes met mine. For a second, he looked like a man caught in a spotlight. What did you say? I leaned in, placing my napkin gently on the table. I know about her. I've seen you. I followed you. You kissed her on her doorstep like I didn't exist. Like our marriage was disposable.
He didn't speak.
Just stared at me, mouth open slightly, as if words had abandoned him. I know she's wearing a ring, I added. I assume you picked it out. Something delicate.
Gold.
Not as flashy as mine. Edward swallowed hard, setting his cutlery down with trembling hands. It's not what you think, he murmured. Isn't it? I asked, keeping my voice even. You're engaged to someone else, while still married to me. What do you think it looks like? He looked around the restaurant, perhaps hoping the walls would swallow him. The waiter arrived then with our mains, forcing him to compose himself. The tension thickened, stretching like piano wire. I was going to tell you, he said once the waiter left. I didn't know how. You were going to tell me after you married her? He flinched. I could see the shame crawl up his neck like ivy. I made a mistake. No, I said quietly. You made a choice. Again and again. And now so will I. He blinked. What does that mean? It means I'm not going to wait around while you play house with someone else. You want to live two lives, but I won't be one half of your lie. His jaw clenched. So, what are you saying? I picked up my wine glass, held it steady between my fingers. I'm saying this is our last anniversary. Enjoy your dinner. I stood, smoothed my dress, and walked out of the restaurant into the crisp night air. Behind me, I heard him call my name. Just once. But I didn't turn back. The morning after our anniversary dinner, the house was eerily quiet. Edward hadn't come home. I wasn't surprised. I imagined he'd gone straight to Clara's, tail between his legs, hoping to escape the fallout.
I didn't cry.
Not because I wasn't broken, but because I had already mourned this marriage in silence. For months, maybe years. This time, I wasn't going to crumble. I was going to reclaim myself, piece by piece. I brewed a pot of tea and sat in the conservatory, letting the weak sunlight settle on my skin. That's when I noticed the envelope on the kitchen counter.
Ivory.
Unmarked. Placed too neatly to be forgotten. Inside was a letter. Edward's handwriting, hurried but legible. Anna, you deserve more than silence. I couldn't say everything last night. I was ashamed. Still am. Clara wasn't supposed to happen. I met her through work, and at first it was harmless. But it became something else. I got lost. Not in her, don't mistake me, but in the version of myself I thought I was with her. I felt admired again, exciting, useful. You and I, we grew still. And I mistook that stillness for emptiness. I never stopped caring about you, but I stopped showing it.
And that's on me.
I know I've hurt you. If I could take it back, I would. But now I can only ask for your forgiveness. Not to fix things, not to return to what we were, but because I owe you that much. Edward. I folded the letter and placed it on the table. Forgiveness. The word lingered like smoke. I wasn't sure I had it in me yet, but I didn't feel rage. Not anymore. Just a deep, aching grief for the life I thought we had. I packed a small bag that afternoon. Clothes, chargers, my favorite book. I needed to get away. I called Isabel, my old university friend who now lived in Cornwall. I need some space, I said simply.
Come.
Stay as long as you like, she replied without hesitation. Before I left, I walked into our bedroom and opened the drawer beside Edward's side of the bed. Inside were cufflinks, a bottle of aftershave, and another envelope. Curiosity prickled. I opened it. It was from Clara. Dear Edward, the ring is beautiful. I can't wait to tell my parents this weekend. Have you spoken to Anna yet? I'm worried. I don't want our life to begin with secrets. There it was. The future they'd mapped out. A quiet wedding, introductions to her family, a life built on lies. I didn't take the letter. I didn't need it. I placed both envelopes side by side on the kitchen table. Let them sit there like ghosts. By the time I reached Isabel's cottage, nestled between the cliffs and sea spray, I felt something I hadn't in months. Lightness. Not happiness. Not yet. But something like the first inhale after drowning. The Cornish coast was wild and untamed, and so was I. For the first week, I hardly spoke. Isabel didn't push. She let me be. We took long walks along the cliffs. I slept with the windows open, letting the salt air sweep through my lungs. I wrote in a journal. Not about Edward, not at first. Just observations.
Colors. Sounds.
The way the tide never apologized for coming in. Then one morning, as we shared breakfast, Isabel asked, "Are you ready to talk about him?" I sipped my tea. He's getting married. To her. Isabel's face didn't change. "And what are you going to do?" "I'm going to live," I said. "Without him." It wasn't a vow of revenge or defiance. Just clarity. I wasn't the broken wife anymore. I was someone else now. But the storm wasn't over yet. 2 days later, Edward showed up in the rain. I saw his car pull up through the kitchen window. I froze. Isabel, calm as ever, stood and said, "I'll be in the garden." I opened the door before he could knock. He looked tired, damp, his hair clinging to his forehead. "Anna," he said, voice low, "you're not supposed to be here." "I know, but I needed to see you." He stepped inside before I could stop him. Rain dripped onto the wooden floor. He didn't sit, just stood there, clutching something in his hand. "I called off the engagement," he said. The words felt like pebbles, skipping across the surface of my calm. I narrowed my eyes. "Why?" "Because I realized something," he said. "It was never about Clara. It was about me running from everything I didn't want to fix. And the moment I read your note, what you said about your light, I knew I'd let it all go dark." He handed me the thing in his hand. The ring. Clara's engagement ring. "I don't want to ask you to come back," he said. "That would be selfish. But I wanted you to know I ended it. Not for you. For me. Because I had to stop pretending." I took the ring from him, studied it. A small diamond, elegant and cold. "I don't know what you want me to say," I murmured. "Nothing," he replied. "You don't owe me anything." And then, almost like he couldn't help himself, "Do you think there's a chance?" My silence was louder than any answer. He nodded, stepped back into the rain, and drove away. That night, I stood alone on the cliffs, wind roaring in my ears. I screamed not out of pain but release. Let the sea take it all. Then I returned to the cottage, shut the door behind me, and began again. Days turned into weeks. The storm inside me began to settle. Isabel and I grew closer, our friendship becoming a lifeline. She never asked about Edward. She just listened when I spoke of hope and fear, of wanting to be whole again. I started painting, something I hadn't done since university. Colors spilled from the brushes, vibrant and raw, mirroring the healing I felt. The cottage became my sanctuary, a place where the past lost its grip. Then one afternoon, as I was finishing a canvas, the phone rang. It was Edward. "Can we meet?" he asked. My heart raced. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect the new life I was building. But something else, a quiet hope, made me say yes. We met at a small cafe in St. Ives, the sea sparkling behind him. Edward looked different, humbled, sincere. "I don't expect anything," he said. "But I want to be honest. I've spent these weeks learning what it means to truly see someone, to value them." I nodded, unsure of where this would go. He reached out, taking my hand gently. "If you ever want to try again, I'll be here. But I'll wait as long as it takes." The weight of the past still lingered, but so did a new possibility. I squeezed his hand and smiled, a real smile. Not because I was sure of the future, but because I was ready to find out. The light I thought was lost was flickering again. Spring arrived in Cornwall, painting the cliffs with blossoms and new life. I stood at the edge of the garden, feeling the fresh breeze brush my face, the salt air mingling with the scent of flowers. Edward and I had taken things slowly. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight, but with each shared cup of tea, every honest conversation, the distance between us began to close. Isabel's encouragement never wavered. "You deserve happiness," and she said one afternoon, watching me smile freely again. I thought about all I had endured, the silence, the pain, the loneliness. And yet, here I was, stronger and more certain of myself than ever. Edward had changed, but so had I. We were not perfect, but we were willing to try. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Edward and I sat on the porch, hands entwined. "I'm ready to build something new," he whispered. I looked at him, hope shining in my eyes. Me too. The past would always be a part of us, but it no longer defined us. Together, we stepped into a future shaped by understanding and love. A new beginning,